Hello everyone, and welcome back to a Hearts of Iron 4 Dev Diary. Today we're going to be looking at an early look into the Switzerland Dev Diary, part 1 might I add, so this is just going to be covering the historical stuff as opposed to the old history. Switzerland probably being one of the more least suspected countries to get a focus tree, especially due to their strict neutrality, but this Dev Diary is going to try and show you that there is some hope for Switzerland and it could be more interesting to play with what they've done with it. Without further ado, let's take a look. So we begin with an introduction from Carlo, who is the content designer for Switzerland in By Blood Alone, and they're going to be showing you that their version of the Swiss focus tree is going to be pretty good. Now, while one might believe that the general position of Switzerland is to chill out, stay neutral, and as they say, make fondue, it is unfortunately not quite like that. We begin by talking about some historical background as to why Switzerland isn't as boring as some might think it to be, specifically about how at the beginning there was a loose confederation of free small countries that had all pledged to help each other via the... Okay, brace yourself everyone. Eidgenossenschaft? Let's hope that was said well enough that people don't get mad at me. But anyway, this decentralised government had continued growing around the cantons with a strong military reputation. After the fall of Napoleon, Swiss neutrality was established, and this meant that they could finally just chill in loving peace and harmony, apart from the, revolutions and stuff that followed after. So Switzerland, with its decentralised rule, the country being led by a building, is currently gripped by fear of war breaking out. As such, playing as Switzerland, you're going to be embarking on the path of making sure you don't get the same fate as Belgium during World War I and effectively being the third-party battleground between two major powers, that being the Third Reich and France. If to do this you're following the historical path, you'll also have to do this while keeping Swiss democracy alive, and that is how we shall begin. So the focus tree as we currently see it looks something like this, with a general central path to go down at the beginning before making some key decisions about which border you're going to be fortifying against. And then if you choose to fortify the border with Germany, as in a anti-Reich stance, you're going to have to pursue the path of armed neutrality to try and hold the line. In more detail, the focus tree begins like a mountain, as you begin with very few choices and start dripping down. And once you take the Swiss guiding principles focus, this will initiate the balance of power system, which will look pretty familiar if you've seen the Italian balance of power system between Mussolini and the Grand Council. So I feel like this is going to be a somewhat recurring thing we're going to see across all the focus trees. So much like how with the Italian power system, it was a balance between two separate identities within the same political structure, both of them were fascists, except one was more so an individual authoritarian dictatorship, and the other one was kind of a more general, unknown, spooky council. This one is going to take the form of having to pick between putting power in the cantons, very decentralised, local citizen militias kind of thing with limited council power, or you could take the position of empowering the central council and making a central government more and more powerful as an individual thing, which will become an alt history path. Since this Dev Diary is going to be talking about the historical path, we're going to be focusing on if you went with the cantons and you kept the standard, decentralised, peaceful Switzerland. And here we can see what happens if you give full power to the cantons, the full cantonal power, by losing war support, because we don't want any war, but also having a negative 100% political advisor cost. That's a pretty big advisor cost reduction. I guess you have to be quite careful about what kind of advisors you're going to give Switzerland when you can so easily, effectively pull them in and out whenever you want. But regardless of whether or not you want a war, that doesn't mean war isn't coming for you. And so as you move further down, you're going to have to start increasing your defence budget and the national defence funds to embark on an ongoing rearmament, giving you some slight buffs to building up your country, as well as building military factories. But once you've got your balance of power mechanics and completed both of your early game rearmament decisions, you get reaffirmed spiritual defense, where you have to really prioritize the nation towards an oncoming threat, which threatens your Swiss way of life, giving you some kind of interesting passive spirits. Far more negative stuff in there than positive stuff, especially with like the war support and recruitable population. But if you want to get some early civs, then you start with this. it's from there that focus will be a central theme as a national spirit to how the rest of your campaign will shape in terms of preparing your country. Depending on if you go down historical path or alt history path, will determine what kind of buffs or debuffs you're going to get for the passive spirit. That's not mentioning the kind of cool looking artwork we can see here with the woman with her spear and shield. But once you have managed to empower the woman being the spirit of Helvetia and all of the powers that be within, you have the beginnings of a choice, and this of course is the key choice you mentioned earlier. Who are you going to be fortifying your border against? Italy, Germany, or France? The real question is, why isn't there an Austria? I feel like the threat of a looming Austro-Hungarian Empire could cause concerns for Switzerland, but I guess that's not a major concern at the historical 1936 start. But regardless, because you share a common language with each of the three nations, they might see that as some justification to annex you. So being careful of that, you might want to be cautious about who you're fortifying your border against, which is the segue into the next talking point: absolute neutrality mechanic. So following in the footsteps of the Netherlands, who are vying for trade control between Germany and Britain, we see a system where the Swiss are vying for neutrality between Germany, France and Italy in the absolute neutrality mechanic. The long and short of it is, if you take too many actions in favour of one nation, you might start to alienate another, and if you alienate a nation enough, they may decide to see that as you've broken your so-called neutrality and use it as justification to invade you. Once the opinion gets low enough, a timer will begin, and if you haven't seen to help or raise opinion with that particular nation, I'm afraid that's it, and they might go to war with you. I do wonder if France would ever do that though. Like, let's say you went favourably with Germany and Italy. Is a democratic France really going to go to war with you? That doesn't feel very kind and, wholesomely democratic of them. The system is described as being pretty flexible and can keep track of up to 4 majors around Switzerland and adjusts for them as such. It's interesting that they say up to 4 majors when there's 3. I was joking about Austria earlier, but now I'm thinking maybe they are actually preparing for the potential that a major nation might eventually border up against you that you didn't expect, and so you'll have to flip and start working to appease them instead. It's kind of an interesting thing they've accounted for. We also can see in this image that there is some hostility towards Germany and Switzerland, and you only have what I think is 60 days to raise opinion with them. So not really too long to make friends again. You should probably be pretty cautious of that. But we continue down the historical path, and as could be expected from a democratic nation, you will find yourself having to ban the Swiss Nazi parties, which is probably going to annoy Germany and Italy, your 2 biggest rival enemies that could possibly destroy you on your bordered front. This has to be done though if you want to get to the armed neutrality branch, which is going to be your central defensive branch for the Swiss tree in case you do start to get invaded. This is kind of your hunker down fortress in the Alps kind of focus tree path. Now, Switzerland is described as not having a traditional military build-up in the common sense of the word. Because of their Helvetic role throughout history as being a mixed area of cantons with all different languages and cultures, all in the Alps, it was not really the plan to have a large central Swiss army, but more so a series of local conscripts from different places that could quickly be rallied in as soon as 24 hours. Because of this very different shift from a traditional army, the Swiss have their own unique military system. So Switzerland will start with its own unique recruitment law, the Swiss Citizen Militia, which gives them a 10% recruitable population with no negative effects. So, hey, nobody can complain about that one. The downside of that though is you cannot train regular troops. Only some mountaineers, so which I assume would be the citizen militias, which would be the small professional army they could have, but in terms of a generally large standing army with all the traditional things you would expect, that is not something you will see here. So to make up the big bulk of the army, to make sure that your border isn't completely undefended, you're going to be training militias, which were the new unit type that was described in the Italian dev diary. They're basically let's say, smaller, I want to say weaker, but they're generally just smaller units than average, which has the benefit of being able to be recruited very quickly, so very short time to create the troops. These Swiss militia have a cap to how many you can train, and it's a locked template, so even though you can build some people with this 10% recruitable population, it's now limited how many people you can create. You get one thing, but another thing gets taken away. In addition, you will have the Dormant Citizen Militia's National Spirit, which is also going to make your militia very, very weak. Look at these debuffs. Negative 50% on attack, defense, speed, org, and negative 70% on recovery cap. I have very little faith in these units. I guess you're having to hope that their sort of synergy with the Alps and maybe building some forts with some good air force is going to be the general thing to holding out, because my goodness, that is painful. All is not lost though, because this national spirit and these militia can be embettered the same way you can do that with the black shirts in Italy through the series of decisions we see here. So using political power and some command power, you can increase things like military readiness and get more template size or the amount of templates you can train, try and improve the buff or debuff in this case to make it not as severe, and generally just do things in general that are going to make it far less painful to defend your border as Swiss militia. So going back to the armed neutrality, you'll find 3 branches: the Promote Gussan branch, the Frontier Defense Plan branch, and a shared one. Following down the Frontier Defense Plan, you're going to find a general theme of trying to hold the border for as long as possible. I'm thinking Grand Battle Plan for max entrenchment, but if you follow the path down, you'll see focuses like Fight Until the Death, which are going to be improving national spirits, which are to do with defending your core territory, keeping up high org, and generally not giving away a single tile. So the next interesting aspect of the Swiss military to talk about is the lack of kind of military ranks and the traditional general system we're used to. The highest rank they went with is Corps Commander, with there being only a single general who would be the Commander-in-Chief of the army. The person in question for this conflict is going to be Henry Guisan. With the Promote Henry Guisan sub-branch, you're going to be giving him basically the central buffs he needs to be able to really take control of the entire army front. The general strategy you're going to be taking with this branch is going to involve a effective retreat into your own territory, so that as the country is invaded, they're going to find the conditions there extremely unfavourable for them and very favourable for you being, mountaineers in a mountain territory, so that the longer they stay there, the harder it's going to be and the easier it's going to be to kind of drip them of manpower and resources and all the rest of it, so you can hold out and make their life terrible. I'm getting flashbacks to Napoleon in Russia. Oof. To reflect this in this conflict, should you find yourself being attacked, you have the ability to move back into your own country while increasing your defences in the mountains for as long as possible, and there is now a Gotthard Pass victory point, which can become your capital once Bern has been lost. I'll briefly talk about the Promote Henry Guisan focus, because adding him as Chief of the Army gives you 0.4 daily army experience gain. Now this could be work in progress, but my goodness, these are some pretty good buffs for just an army commander. And if you're empowering the cantons, is it just political advisors that are going to be free, or is this guy going to be free too? I'm just saying, that's a pretty powerful chief of army. Now with your army and front looking somewhat defensible, you're going to have to make sure you stay relevant in this war. And one way that's going to be happening is with the intelligence, which we see from La Resistance. So in order to do this, you'll find yourself having to work alongside the Allies, the Axis, possibly even the Soviets, when there are 2 focuses you can get to get a free intelligence agency. On the historical path, we find the Federal Police Intelligence, which should give you some buffs towards counterintelligence, as well as minor daily fascism support. This is because you're going to be working with the existing federal police, as well as making sure you can keep things secure inside your own world. But if you don't want to make an agency that's specifically sort of keeping secrets within your country and keeping an eye on the police, you could go down Bürgerha, which is going to be focusing on building spy networks in other countries and opening up a bunch of defensive, cultural and resistance-oriented focuses. If we actually look at this side of the focus tree, We don't know what these focuses are, but since we can kind of figure out that the general point is you probably don't want to be discovered spying on enemies, not particularly neutral of a so-called neutral Switzerland, they're going to be kind of undermining countries from within. So on the left we see seek allied trade, so that's probably going to be some covert deals, maybe bringing in some equipment that a neutral country shouldn't have. We see case north, which is probably going to be a preemptive invasion of Switzerland by Germany, which is probably why there's going to be a lot of freezing German assets and trying to kick them out. All in all, it's going to be interesting to see what this branch is really going to deliver. And so with that is the general historical path for Switzerland covered, which is interesting because compared to Italy, definitely much smaller, but I guess for a neutral nation, you wouldn't expect it to have the largest focus tree in the world. It's also interesting how it seems the military and politics are effectively so intertwined that they have just become one single tree. So I do wonder if the entire tree in and of itself is literally just one thing, and there is no such thing as a sub-branch. You start from the top, and you only start from the top. So that's kind of the vibe I'm getting from this early look. But anyway, we've talked about the focus tree, so let's talk about the political systems, because this is a central role with Switzerland being so unique in its canton systems. So to represent the interesting, unique situation that Switzerland have, there were 7 members of the council and a president, and in Huy there are 3 political advisor slots. So, of these 3 advisor slots, all of them will be taken up by real members of the council, and every year, starting from 37, you'll have an event to promote one of these members of the council to become the president themselves. Then the next year they'll be retired and you lose that advisor forever. So make sure whoever you've got in those advisor slots, if you're willing to get rid of them, you need to be conscious of that. The good news is that once you get rid of them, you get to add them onto your country as a powerful decision relevant to the trait they had that when they were an advisor. Central to keeping the Swiss system alive, all 3 of those advisor slots have to be filled, otherwise negative debuffs are coming. There are 25 advisors to choose from, so hopefully you should be able to manage. If you start with 3 and 1 goes every year, you should have 20 good years ahead of you. If you're planning on playing till 1956 though, I don't actually know what's going to happen. I guess good luck to you, I suppose. Depending on which advisors you pick, will also impact things like the balance of power, as well as increasing chances of going down alternative paths for the country. So it is definitely something to constantly be playing with as you're going through every year. In this image we can see the Federal Council as it's represented in game. We can see 3 of the leading councillors, which are your political advisors, as well as whoever you've picked to become the president of the Swiss Confederation. As well as that, you also have 2 decisions based upon people you've had as president, and they give you buffs. The buff we see here is the Swiss Democratic Traditional Campaign, giving you weekly stability gain of +2, which is that's just huge. However, negative 1% war support gain. That is not huge. That's like the opposite of huge. It's like minute. Ugh. Next up, we're talking about something that's very cool to me, and I love talking about and seeing these changes. We're talking about map changes. So, to my mind, I'm pretty sure Switzerland was previously divided into 2 states. That has now changed and we're up to 5 states. That being the Swiss Plateau, the Western Swiss Alps, the Eastern Swiss Alps, Ticino, oh goodness me, how do you even pronounce that? Ticino, and the Jura Mountains. In addition, there's plenty of new victory points to take. I'm seeing Lugano, I'm seeing Chur, and I'm seeing the Gotthard Pass, which is going to be your emergency capital. It's also important to notice that the Alps have effectively become a giant impassable terrain, which they previously were not, meaning that getting from A to B, as in Germany to Italy, is going to be a lot more difficult if you don't have access through Switzerland, specifically the Gotthard Pass and Chur. This is to kind of historically represent how getting through this region was actually quite difficult, especially when you're retreating from Italy towards the end of World War II. And so invading Switzerland isn't just going to be about annexing the territory, but also about annexing the routes it can give you going through their country. I will also say, Was Vorarlberg talked about? Vorarlberg, that state there in Austria. I think that's brand new. I know they said they're not doing anything with Austria, but I don't remember there being a change to Austria talked about previously. Interesting. Wait, they wouldn't. They couldn't have. There's no way they can add in Liechtenstein. Obviously, Liechtenstein is not that huge. However, if there was ever a time where you could argue a state could be given to Liechtenstein, it's Vorarlberg. Oh my goodness. If it hasn't been done before, it's definitely going to be done with that state. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, no, 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 no. As a final note to talk about the map, I will say I'm ever so slightly concerned about the way the states look. While I don't really hate the shape, it's more so a technicality that when you want to build things in states that are like microstates, if you have even a slightly zoomed out camera, it's really difficult to see things. If you try it on like very condensed areas, all of the overlaying graphics, because the states are so small, can become a bit difficult to see. So I'm wondering if that's going to be an issue here, especially with like the Swiss plateau, which is surrounded by like 4 also very small states. Just something to consider. In the next image, we see the continuation of the Alps' giant defensive line, which is actually way more cool than I thought it was going to be, because, you know, playing as Austria has traditionally been pretty painful, pretty not fun, because you get annexed by Germany. But now, with the Swiss Alps being effectively an impassable terrain, you only have, 3 or 4 tiles that you actually need to defend against the Germans? That is like a much easier task to do than it was previously. I could sense an interesting Austria shift with this. And so to wrap things up, we talk about the final thing they want to cover, which is a new national spirit, Brandy the St. Bernard, which is the first dog to feature as a focus icon in the game. It's going to give you bonuses towards field hospitals, which they describe as slightly ahistorical, but worth it because you get to have a dog. This is combined, of course, with the UK going monarchist, getting Queen Elizabeth II, and then you get to pick her 3 corgis as advisors. All in all, I think it looks good. I think it looks interesting. I am kind of surprised about how small it's looking. I thought if there was going to be a focus on Switzerland, they'd really want to open it up. But I guess we'll figure out when we see the alt history branches whether there's going to be much more growth there. I'm just thinking about like the interactions with Austria or how they'd annex new territory, because when you're basically surrounded by 3 majors, the options for kind of expanding are very difficult to get a hold of. But regardless, we'll save that for the future Dev Diary. Next up, we've got Ethiopia. So if you're looking forward to some Ethiopian 1936 madness, oh please God no, then make sure you come next time. If you want to see that, you can like, you can subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. It means a lot. Just to set the record straight, it's Il Duce, okay? Not Il Duce. I said it wrong. People were very mad at me. I don't speak Italian. I don't claim to speak Italian. Il Duce. Okay, we've got it. Cool. Cool? Cool. Bye.